Hello, listeners and viewers. We are glad today to have with us Ido Yahya. Um, he recently co-authored an article titled Entity-Elimination or Threat Management, explaining Israel's shifting policies towards terrorist semi-states in terrorism and political violence. Hello, Yahya. You're welcome.
Hi, hi, Wisdom.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Um, we we are happy to really have you discuss this article with us because of especially the recent happenings in
Yeah.
Israel. So we'll go straight to the first question. State the research question or give us a background to this study. What was the puzzle that made that, or the policy issues that drove motivated this research?
So we started working on a previous article when we discussed a certain term. We called it a terrorist semi-state. Um, we started thinking about it when ISIS took over parts of Syria and Iraq and managed this part uh, as a state. So ISIS established a certain civilian service, provided several civilian civic service for the people who lived in the areas he occupied and we fought. And at the same time, it also attacked external states, not just Syria and Iraq, but other external states. And we thought that this is an interesting phenomenon. When we looked at it in a broader look, we saw that it is not unique. It happened before, and it happened several times when we looked at the Israeli-Palestinian case. So after we published our initial article about this phenomena, about the terrorist semi-state, we narrowed our perspective only to the Israeli case, and we discovered that this phenomenon also occurred during the 1970s when the Fatah organization, then chaired by Yasser Arafat, was expelled from Jordan to Lebanon in 1970. It established an entity in southern Lebanon when this entity was ex-territory for the Lebanese army, and they also established certain civic institute there in South Lebanon, while continuing attacking Israeli northern settlements. So they have all the characteristics of a terrorist semi-state. And the same thing is, we can witness the same thing now with Hamas in Gaza. In 2007, Hamas deported Fatah, or the Palestinian Authority, from Gaza, and from this year on, it is the sole ruler of Gaza, with all the things attached to it being the sole ruler of Gaza, but it's continuing to attack Israel from time to time, as you mentioned, just a month ago, the last round of fighting between Israel and Hamas. So we wanted to examine the different ways Israel is dealing with this unique entity, which is not a regular terror organization, but it's not really a state. It's some kind of an hybrid entity. So this was the motivation for our article, of our study.
Oh, great. That's great. So, what's your core argument? What's the core argument of this study?
So our core argument, basically, we can see a variation in the Israeli responses to both cases. And the interesting thing in this variation is that there is a negative correlation between the level of the military threat and the level of the Israeli response. So if we are looking at the case of the 1970s, 1980s with Fatah in Lebanon, during the 1970s, Fatah carried out some of the deadly terror attacks against Israeli territory, killing over almost 100 citizens. But Israel uh, didn't really act to eliminate this entity. It may do with certain air attacks. In 1978, after the biggest and most gruesome terror attack killed around just over 30 Israeli citizens, they invaded Lebanon in an operation dubbed Operation Litani, and just cleared most of the Fatah operatives from the areas that bordered Israel, but they didn't really eliminate this entity. But in 1982, after a relatively calm year, when Yasser Arafat pretty much imposed restraint over most of his warriors, Israel invaded Lebanon and eradicated this entity and deported it to Lebanon. The same thing we can see today with regards to Hamas in Gaza. When Hamas took over, Israel had another prime minister, which was not who was not Benjamin Netanyahu. I know it sounds crazy, but we had a different prime minister before him. And in 2000 and in late 2008, early 2009, this prime minister Ehud Olmert embarked on a military operation, the most extensive military operation in Gaza since 2007. He wanted to eliminate Hamas rule in Gaza, but because he was weak, this was just 1 month before an election that Olmert was not supposed to run in. He was not nominated for to continue being prime minister, so his partners in the government prevented him from taking this step. On the other hand, Hamas's power in Gaza just increased over time, but the successive governments of Benjamin Netanyahu didn't do anything to eliminate Hamas rule in Gaza. Sometimes they just reduced his power, reduced his capabilities, like the tunnels in 2015, 2014, I'm sorry. But they are pretty much happy with Hamas's rule in Gaza. So we found that there is a negative correlation between the level of military threat stemming from this entity, from this terrorist semi-state, and the level of Israeli response.
Okay,
and
so if we're going to tell our listeners, you want to tell our listeners in one sentence your core argument, what would you say?
So the core argument is that the level of political threat determines the level of Israel military response, not the level of military threat. What does it mean? It means that there is this entity poses a certain threat to the political goals of the Israeli government. And when this threat becomes intolerable, this political threat, it acts to eliminate this entity. So this is the core argument.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
So do you want me to expand about the political threat?
Yes, tell us about your methodology. How did you test this very interesting argument?
So again, as I said, we looked at the level of military threat, and then we looked at the ideology and the political goals of the leaders. And we saw that immediately after there was a change of government in Israel in 1981, the new government acted to try to find every pretext to invade Lebanon and remove the Fatah from this area. And then we looked at the people who occupied key positions in the new government. So one of them was Defense Minister Ariel Sharon. The second was the Foreign Minister Yitzhak Shamir. Both of them were adherents of the Greater Israel ideology. They wanted to suppress any kind of any form of Palestinian nationalism, and the Palestinians who ran a kind of a semi-state in Lebanon was perceived as a serious political threat because the Palestinians proved that they are able to run a state, right? And if you are an adherent of Greater Israel, then a Palestinian state that can also raise a national awareness among the people in the territories is a great threat for you. So this was the first finding we found, and then in the other case, with regards to Hamas, it's the opposite. Hamas, not only that it is not a political threat to Benjamin Netanyahu, it's a political blessing for him, because as long as Hamas control Gaza, there is no incentive for him to start a negotiation with the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, because for him he will say, so I will make peace only with half of the Palestinians, right? I will evacuate the territories, but I will only get peace with half of the Palestinians. So he didn't do anything to remove Hamas from power in Gaza. And Ehud Olmert, the prime minister who preceded Netanyahu, he wanted to achieve peace with the Palestinians, and for this reason, Hamas's rule was perceived as a political threat, because as long as Hamas controls Gaza, there is no real chance for an Israeli-Palestinian peace.
Okay, that's a nice one. So, were you able to confirm your core argument? What's your primary? Tell us about your primary findings.
So this is what we found. Actually, I combined the two questions to one answer. So we found that again that there is a positive, as there is a negative correlation between the level of military threat and the level of Israeli military response. There is a positive correlation between the level of political threat and the level of Israeli military response. There is, in the case of Menachem Begin second government, where Ariel Sharon and Yitzhak Shamir occupied an important positions, Israel acted to eliminate the Fatah terrorist semi-state in southern Lebanon, whereas in the case where Ehud Olmert was the prime minister, wanted to achieve a peace agreement just before he was about to evacuate the prime minister office, he wanted to remove Hamas, because their continuous war over Gaza was a serious political threat for his plan.
So how does this key into the recent conflict?
So along Benjamin Netanyahu was the Israeli prime minister for the past 12 years. I think this was the best 12 years for Hamas in Gaza. In the recent years, he signed an agreement with Qatar to provide $50 million every month for Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu did everything in his power to perpetuate Hamas's role in Gaza. Because, as I said before, this is a blessing for him. Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to avoid any prospects of serious negotiation with the Palestinian Authority. So for him, Hamas can rule Gaza until the end of time. I think the implications are that if you truly want a peace between Israel and Palestinians, you have to remove Hamas's rule from Gaza, because otherwise there is really no prospect for it. As long as Hamas controls Gaza, there is no real chance for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement.
So you're explaining that the attack on Gaza recently. So I want to.
So the attack in Gaza recently is not really relevant to our article, because it happened just two weeks before Netanyahu left office. So people really connected to his own ambition, to his own political survival.
So it ties back to politics again.
Yes, but it doesn't really. I don't think it really connects to our argument. It really relates to a prime minister that really fought for his political life. So you can connect it when we are talking about domestic politics and trying to arouse certain rally around the flag effect, in a way that it will prevent the rise of a government that the left-wing parties and the Arab parties are an important part of it, just as the current government, the current government, the left-wing parties and one of the Arab parties are important part of the current government. So people are saying that the latest conflict was also about this, about Netanyahu's attempts to prevent the establishment of this party, of this government, I'm sorry.
Okay, so theoretically, what do you think what's the contribution of this article to the broader, larger research?
So I think the term political threat, I don't think it gets the proper attention it deserves. I think people often look at the military threat. People often look at the opportunity factor, perhaps, but that they fail to look at the leaders themselves and their vision for the region on the one hand, and what constitutes a threat to their vision on the other. And when we are looking at the responses to a certain entity that can threaten you in so many ways, we have to consider other aspects other than just the military threat.
Okay, with the change of government in Israel, do you think the way Israel treats what you have called as terrorist semi-states, do you think it will be different?
So the first indication suggests that yes, the Netanyahu. So we have for the past 3 years, I think, Hamas sends mainly children to the fence to launch balloons with bombs attached to it. This caused a lot of damage to the Israeli farmers who live on the other side of the fence near Gaza. So during Netanyahu time, there was no response to this act at all, or the most severe response was to attack some empty building or something. So 2 weeks ago, or 1 week ago, I don't remember, just recently, the new government responded in a more aggressive way to these balloon attacks, and it didn't happen again for now. I imagine it will happen again. But the new government seems to be more aggressive when it comes to dealing with Hamas. Let us see, because again, the current Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, also really doesn't want to engage in any kind of negotiation with the Palestinian Authority, but his partners from the coalition do. So it's complicated with the current government. No one really know what's its vision. Let us see.
Okay, all good. So do you think, first of all, what are the limitations? What do you think are the limitations of this study, especially considering the attack on Gaza about a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, and the change of government in Israel? So what do you think are the limitations of these studies, then, of this article? Then how do you think they can be addressed? And are you doing any other, are you and Oro, your co-author, are you working on any other research to further your findings?
So yeah, it's not really related to terrorism or Gaza, but we also want to expand on this term, as I said, about the different kind of threats and the different responses to these threats. So yes, we are working on another kind of studies in this field, and we kind of left the terrorism research on the side for the moment. But if you are talking on a broader aspects, if we are talking on limitations in the broader aspects, obviously, when we look only on one state, only on Israel, there is an inherent limitation, because how can you say that it also valid for other states? So it needed to be tested in other states, and we are doing it right now.
Okay.
In other aspects, not specifically related to terrorist state, but in other aspects or different responses to different political threats. And with regards to the current situation in Gaza, I think there are two things. First of all, as I said before, we really don't know what the new government wants because it is a very eclectic government composed of two right-wing parties, three center parties, two left-wing, and one Arab party. so it will be extremely difficult for this government to formulate any kind of policy towards Gaza and the Palestinians in general. And the second, I think, in contrast to 2007 and even 2014, I think now it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to eradicate Hamas's rule in Gaza. Perhaps it can be done, but at a terrible cost to both sides. So I don't think any kind of government, no matter what its political goals, will be able to go along with this kind of operation. I think it was doable in 2017. I think it was doable in the early years of Netanyahu's rule. Now, I don't really think it's doable. So this is another limitation with regard to this specific arena.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Idoya, and congratulations again on this article. And we hope when we invite you again for discussion on your any other article, I believe you will oblige us.
Happy to.
Thank you very much. Viewers, that has been Ido Yael. He has discussed his recent article. Please subscribe to this channel and so that you can receive our programs directly on your device. Thank you for joining us. My name is Wisdom Yekekbolo. Thank you. Bye for now.